everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Content Alchemy. And we have another great episode planned for you today, all around the theme of trust and trusting in your team and your relationship with your clients and even your audience as well. And today we're going to be joined by Chris Logsdon. Chris has more than 2 decades of experience in the advertising industry and describes himself as a seasoned creative with the passion of a rookie. He has spent the last 9 years inside the VaynerMedia walls, Gary V's agency. And 4 years ago, he took a hard left turn, transforming a late night side gig into a fresh role for himself and a novel offering for the company. Since then, he's helped breathe life into numerous brands, both big and small. He is based in Saratoga Springs, New York, and when he's not working, he can be found navigating the adventure-filled realm of parenting with his wife and 2 kids and cheering extremely loud for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, those San Francisco 49ers will be important here at the beginning of the episode, but let's just get into things. And again, the theme of this episode is all about trust.
Chris, I feel extremely underdressed right now. You are wearing all of your 49ers stuff. You are ready.
Yeah, I'm not gonna apologize for today's get up. It's an exciting day in my household. We are 49er fans, as you can tell, and I take these things very seriously. So you're welcome.
Yes. Shelby, how are you doing? I noticed you didn't have any of your football gear on.
No 49ers gear. I'm wondering the same question. Yeah, same thing.
It's still in my closet. It's being kept packed away for tonight because I know everything about football. I think that's the key here. But I do appreciate a good fit. So I love that Chris came dressed to impress. I appreciate that.
Let's go. There are a few things I'm passionate about in this life. One of them are my San Francisco 49ers. So for those who don't know, Thursday night football on Prime, Niners, Seahawks. We are horrible right now, but we're going to turn it around starting tonight. Mark my words. So there you
go. Well, this just said everything for me that I know who I'm going to be supporting this evening. I know zero, but I will be there rooting in spirit. So
let's go. I appreciate that.
So Chris, obviously, I feel like you're what?
I said, good to see you guys.
Yeah, so good to see you too. And obviously, I think it feels like you're in a pretty good mood, a very hopeful mood. So how are you doing in general? What's up?
I'm doing great. I mean, I'm always in a good mood. I think it's just part of my DNA. I'm like the eternal optimist, even in bad times. So that's always just my outlook. But it gets a little extra hyped after arguably, I think my second or third cup of coffee on game day. So there's going to be an extra spice brought to today's conversation, I feel like. So excited to be here. And again, good to see you both. And I know we have a little bit of history having worked together. But I think there's a lot more for us to talk about that I think could lead to some really good conversations today. So I'm excited. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah. Let's actually jump into that a little bit. Yeah. So we've kind of worked together a little bit in the past. And I guess during that time, got to know you and some of just kind of like a little bit of the values that you sort of have when it comes to building brands, right? And I guess I want to start the conversation with a little bit of the experience that you have working at VaynerMedia. And I'm curious what some of the big, most important things that you learned during your time there.
Yeah. So for those who don't know me, which is probably everyone listening to this podcast right now, I've had about 2 decades worth of experience in the creative industry. Actually, 2 decades to the year. I think my first job was in 2004 at an agency in Connecticut, and then later in New York City. But yeah, over the 2 decades of working in the creative industry, I worked across some of the larger agencies, Omnicom, Publicis, and then at the time it was VaynerMedia. Now it's called VaynerX because Gary Vaynerchuk, for those who know or don't know, has built this insane empire. And that was my last agency that I worked for. There's a small group called the Sasha Group that was sort of under the umbrella of VaynerX and VaynerMedia. And I spent about 9 years working there. in my role as a creative director, leading a team of designers, writers, working alongside strategists and videographers and animators and things like that. And I was down in I had helped open up the Chattanooga office down in Tennessee with another group of VaynerMedia folks. And I think my biggest takeaway there, and it's interesting to talk about because I don't think we put enough focus on these things or have perhaps enough discussion around these things. But my biggest takeaway from Vayner at the time that I kind of learned the hard way in my position as a creative director was understanding what my primary job was. Because going into that role, I'd always focused on the work, like the work's got to be good. And again, these are things that I learned at previous agencies under creative directors that I had worked for. Meaning again, like just try to do the best work, the most creative, quote unquote, award-winning type of work, and do it consistently. And when I got into the role of creative director at the Sasha Group during my time, in Chattanooga, I learned very quickly that wasn't what was expected of me at Vayner. Meaning specifically, I had to kind of swing the pendulum the other way and focus on something other than the work. And that was just the human beings on the team. And that was kind of a foreign concept to me. Not that I mistreated them or I was a bad person. I tend to try to treat people fairly the way I'd want to be treated. But when I kind of put my work hat on and go to the office, that had never occurred to me that, that needed to be the primary focus in my role as creative director. And that was one thing that, again, I learned when I was there. It almost cost me my job because I wasn't quite understanding it. And I wasn't having proper conversations with my team and asking the right questions to make sure that they were happy and they were fulfilled with the work that they were doing. So, it was kind of a life lesson that I learned during the working hours when I was there. And it's something that I'll never forget and I'll continue to work on and for the rest of my life, because that was just never taught to me. So I didn't quite understand how I was failing at it. Because again, I thought I was doing a good job directing the team. But it literally came down to asking more specific questions and understanding what each team member wanted and needed out of their role, out of their time spent within, that office there. And it was a hard thing to initially grasp, but then, VaynerMedia and the powers that be there gave me all the tools and direction that I needed in order to start working in a better fashion, in that sense of asking better questions, really connecting with each of my team members to understand what they were looking for within the team that we had built out there.
I think that's one of the most challenging parts of things, right? Like it's one thing to be kind of in this creative role where you're trying to, I don't know, make this like award-winning stuff, make this groundbreaking stuff, push yourself to a new place. And for me, it was like very much like that. When I worked at other places, I was like constantly trying to prove my worth, I guess, prove my value. And then when it came to, okay, now I'm running this ship, like when it came to that, it became, hey, there's actually like so many parts and pieces to doing that. And one of them is, honestly, I think a big thing is like, it's trust. The team needs to be able to trust you. You need to be able to trust them. The clients need to trust you. Like, I feel like trust plays such an important role in all this stuff. I guess I'm curious how that trust sort of developed over your experience.
Yeah, one thing that we focused on a lot during my time at Vayner was just having more interactions, daily interactions with every member on the team, whether it was on the creative team or cross departments, the account team, strategy team. It was sort of a cultural thing at Vayner, no matter what office you were in or whatever role you were working with, whatever role you were working within. They called it the one-on-ones or just coffee walks, right? So literally, my first year there when we were in New York City on the Park Avenue office when we were there, I think once, maybe sometimes twice, 3 times a day, I'd go on just walks around the block. It was kind of fun because you're in New York and it's never a bad idea to just go walking in New York. But literally we would set up times with team members just to say, hey, let's just go on a walk. Let's just talk about anything you want to talk about. And again, that happened in every office that I worked in for Vayner, New York, down in Chattanooga. And it's those moments and those opportunities you have, whether they're 15-minute, like let's just go downstairs and grab a cup of coffee, or let's go out to lunch. It's those moments where you really start to kind of build that connection, and that trust obviously comes through when there's intention behind, making those connections and making them real and valid. And I think that's where team members can start to, again, feel that connection that you have with them. And I was doing it. I was actually doing that quite a bit because I knew that to be a thing within Vayner, but it's not just that, right? Then it comes down to like what I wasn't actually doing during that time was I wasn't actually asking more direct questions. Mm-hmm. The conversations generally were great. I was like, hey, what's going on in your life? How do you feel about work? What do you like? What do you dislike? I was kind of asking broad questions and not really getting specific. And sometimes even asking hard questions like, are you happy here? Do you not like what you're working on? Getting more specific and more intentional behind those questions. That's where I really learned a lot and dug a little bit deeper. And for good or worse, like for better or for worse, like that's where you start to understand the person you're talking with and listening more than hearing. And I think that's where the trust starts to really kind of come out. When you're hearing some of those answers coming back to you and then also reacting to them and trying to, peel back the layers and get more into like, okay, what do you mean by that? And again, almost just leaning in, having more intention behind asking some of those questions and going deeper. And I think that's where more of that trust starts to be built. And then just acting upon that. Like, I hear you, this is an issue, or you like this. Let me see how I can now further get you into that position, because it sounds like you're not happy here. So if I'm hearing you, then let me see what I can do as a creative director to see if I can move you over here. Or you really like what you're doing. Let me see if I can get you more of that work, because I know it's going to make you happy. And if you're happy, and that's the interesting part, is that the more I focused on their happiness and their well-being, the more I had to like not worry about the work, because the work was just going to be good. Because as soon as, again, and we all know this as creatives, like the more work that we do that actually fulfills us, the more we're dedicated to it, the more just it becomes good because we're leaning into it. And that becomes kind of a byproduct of, in that role, that became a byproduct of me focusing more on my team members. And again, I wasn't perfect at it by any means. I'm still working on it to this day in my relationships that I have in my current role. But I did see sort of a nice kind of spike in just attitude and work once I started to kind of work on myself and be better in those moments with each individual person I was having those conversations with.
I love that though. And that's something that we've kind of started doing more at Made by Things is we're really having that personal conversation, because we do our like 6-month reviews, which is great. But like Matt started sending like every Wednesday morning you get a message saying, hey, how are you doing? And like, it's just like, it's such an easy way to be able to prompt a conversation to just know what is it that you're really talking about. Like what's going on with you? What do you need to talk about? What do you need to get off your chest? And it could be, anything. Do you have something personal going on in your life that you feel like you need to share with somebody? Is there something going on with the work that you need to talk about? Are you feeling fulfilled? Are you really happy right now? Is everything going just fine? And you can learn so much, not just about your team, but about the business health in general. Because if everyone's unhappy, well, the health of the business probably isn't very strong anyway. So it is kind of keeping that, what is that morale? How is everyone feeling, and being able to judge, are you having a healthy business right now? Do you need to take a little bit of time? Does it need to go to the doctor for a bit? And I love that, because it really does, showcase what your values are too, as a creative director and as somebody running a team. And I am curious, because you have been starting, you've been working on kind of a new venture these last 4 years. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to bring those values into your current day work right now, and how you're really applying that, in your day to day right now with the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And I think just to take one step back too, because I mean, this is important for those who might be listening who are in various roles within the creative industry, whether it's HR or as a senior leader of a creative team. What you just talked about, like most companies are, and this is what was true for me in the previous agencies that I worked for, where it was like the annual review, right? It's like once a year you get reviewed by a random selection, a committee of people who probably work with you, and they just give you feedback, right? That was sort of typical. And even then, and then some companies started to get on, try to better that a little bit more, like having a mid-year, like a 6 month, just to kind of like, how are we tracking towards that 1 year thing? And what was interesting at Vayner was like those things were set into place, but they always encouraged more individual daily, weekly conversations, because as I'm sure, you both have probably experienced before, like when you wait 6 months or a year, sometimes they can just become a surprise. Like, I didn't know this was happening. It's like, well, because you never asked me about it until my 6 month or 1 year review. And a lot of times it's too late. You're a disgruntled employee who's just like, I've been living in this, for 6 months and no one has approached me about it. And it's like, so having these more intermediate, consistent check-ins are actually quite beneficial for the process in general, but then more importantly for the person who might be having an issue. And that's what was kind of a game changer. And I think more companies need to be kind of instilling this if they're not already doing it. Again, for anyone who's from the HR world or senior leadership or something, like those check-ins were actually mandatory for people in my position when I was at Vayner. And again, they're quite helpful and beneficial, because once I got to the 6 month review or 1 year review, I almost knew everything that was happening. And I was already proactively acting upon those things. Listen, I know you're not happy here, or we've had so many conversations about like this and you really love it. So here's what we're going to do. And we're going to try to implement this to the next 6 months or the next year to kind of get you to the next title promotion, things like that. So it became like really good, almost like data points for me to have during those reviews to say, I already know a lot of these things. And now we're kind of just formalizing it and providing a plan moving forward, versus me showing up being like, oh, I didn't realize you didn't like it here. So it's important to kind of build that into your current structure if it's not already there, because again, you can get a lot of good intel and make those connections, which obviously leads to trust, which we talked about quite early on, versus waiting for some time during those review cycles that seem to be kind of a typical thing in the industry. But yeah, Shelby, answer your question now, because I left Vayner about almost a little over a year ago, to focus more or less on doing the one thing that I enjoy doing the most, which was brand identity. And of course, the three of us had some interactions while at Vayner, working in that space, doing some really fun work in the brand identity portion of what we were doing there. So this past year, I've gone out on my own, started my own company, typical last name design, Logsdon Design, for now at least. And again, I think, to answer your question about like, how do I take those values and implement it now? Even though I don't necessarily have a team that sits alongside me here in the office, at moments I do have working relationships with other designers, copywriters, and it's essentially the kind of the same approach, asking questions. How are they doing? How can we make this work stronger? What can I do for them? They're slightly different questions because these folks are more or less seasoned creative. They're not, again, working directly underneath me, but still a lot of the same, just genuine questions. Well-being, what do you need? How can I make your job easier based off on this project that we're working for? Or are there things outside of this project and this job we're currently working on that you just want to jam on? Sports, 49ers, whatever, health, family, things like that. So in a weird way, learning the hard way at Vayner how to listen better has actually helped me in my own marriage with my wife, right? I was hearing a lot, but I wasn't listening and leaning in and even just acting on the things that I was hearing, right? Like just not having to go through one ear and out the other, but like remembering that and saying, cool, I need to now match my behavior to what I'm nodding to. And so I think a lot of what I learned there is allowed me just to be a better human being in these instances, in these different relationships that I have, whether it's working relationships with other creatives or even with my wife and my kids, so, and it's odd to think about because I always thought that I was a good human being that did, good unto others, but I was severely lacking in this one area where I was just more intentional behind my relationships and conversations that I was having. It was kind of a blind spot that no one ever taught me. Right. Until I had those, difficult conversations at Vayner, and always a credit, I always, give credit to Gary and the culture that he built there and the people that he surrounds himself with. Chief Heart Officer Claude Silver, who works very close with him. I spent a lot of time with her working through that part of the process when I was going through that difficult time. And so, yeah, I mean, that was such an incredible learning experience that, I think I'll always have for the rest of my life, and it'll always inform the way that I treat other people and even the relationships that I build.
Yeah. What I'm curious about is, do you think that the clients that we work for can tell the difference between a good workplace that has a lot of great communication and one that maybe does not? And do you think they care?
I do. And I do think, I think we can all feel it at a certain point, whether it's just a facade being put up. I think there's a lot of times there's cracks in it that anyone can feel. And the way I've tried to approach it with clients, kind of the two things that I've always worked on is just one, more communication with them, right? Like what's this thing about like, the smartest person in the room is the room, right? The collectiveness of everyone in that room working on a project versus just one person. And I think clients are included in that. The more I work with clients and the closer I get with clients, the more I actually start to kind of shut my own mouth and value their opinion even more so. Because there have been times where here comes the creative guy with all the cool creative solves because, I'm the coolest at doing it type of thing, that type of attitude. And I present what I think is incredible work to the client and they don't understand it. They don't get it. And I'm like, how do you not get this? This isn't me. And like, they give me good feedback. I take it, either whether I like it or not. And I'm like, okay, fine. We'll try it based off of whatever he says. And then I do it. Then I'm like, oh shoot, like they were actually right. And that's happened time and time again. And I don't think we give clients enough credit for those things. Now, listen, I say that knowing that there's also been a lot of yes, clients are going to client and they're going to sometimes give feedback. You're just like, I don't think that's going to work. But even in those cases, I'm happy to show them either we tried that. Let's open up the exploratory file and I'll show you that we actually tried that and it didn't work, just so they can, again, that's another trusting moment that, you were talking about with clients, like just to open up and show them, this isn't a magic show. We put the work in, and here's a moment where I'm going to like pull back the curtain, so to speak, and show you that we tried that. Or if we didn't, let me go back and see if that actually works. Sometimes I'd say 80%, 90% of the time it doesn't, but I'm happy to go through that process to quickly show them, because then they trust the option that we are showing them, right? And then there's that 10% of the time where their feedback and their comment, if we're really paying close attention, whether it's direct feedback or if I'm just reading in between the lines, like trying to understand what it is they're looking for, and I go try it, actually yielded a better solve. And I'll be the first one to say, listen, I didn't think that was going to work. I kind of disagreed in the moment, but I'm so happy we did it, because look where we are now. Like, this is 10 times better than what it was when we went in there. So the client leaning in, trusting the process, and as well as the creatives trusting the process. And we always say it too, like, trust the process, trust the process. Part of the process is listening to your client. Like,
right.
That's part of it, and if you're listening carefully and putting sometimes the creative pride aside, I think there could be some moments of magic that can lead to something really, really incredible. And the client loves that too, because then the client feels like they were part of the process and part of the developing the magic that is that project. And that's a win-win for everyone.
Right. So to take that question even one step further, do you feel like, so you're working with a brand, you have your client, do you think that the end audience can feel a difference in the work that's being presented to them, if they are customers of this brand? Do you think they can feel a difference between work that was made by again, with good communication, and one that was maybe not so much? Maybe it was just more of a demand from the higher ups to get this thing made. Does this question make any sense?
It does. And it's a good question, because I don't know if they would.
Right.
As much as we would like to think they might, because we're always so close to the projects where we think like, oh, this is a brilliant little thing. They're going to pick up on it. And it's like, it just flies over people's heads, because a lot of times we're also not aware of the lives that our customers or those people who are going to see the work live. Like, we think that this logo is going to change their life. And it's like, as a father of two and a husband who's also managing a household, like, there are 20 other things that come before anything I do creative or anything that I see. Like, can't you get my kids dressed and get to school? Like, there are bigger things in life that I'm worried about than a brand that I may experience even probably every single day. The logo on the toothpaste packaging, for instance, where it's just like, oh my gosh, like it can tell that creative team and that client really kind of delivered on that. Like, I don't think people care as much as we'd like them to. And that's because they're not supposed to. I think the best work almost goes unnoticed, because it does what it needs to do. And it's not necessarily disrupting in a bad way. But yes, are there moments when you're walking, down an aisle and you see something, you're like, oh, that's really cool. I love the packaging on that. I have friends who aren't designers who I think have experiences like this. And, but I don't know if they're getting at a level where they're really kind of deciphering, oh man, I think the client and the creative really just got it, because they see it as a brand. They don't see it as individual pieces of the puzzle. That's a great brand, right? Liquid Death looks phenomenal. I love the design. I don't think they're necessarily thinking about the client and the creative agency who brought that together, because it's much more of a simple moment for them than it is really going deeper. We care about that stuff because we live it. I just don't think the consumers necessarily do. Until maybe it goes bad.
Yeah.
Until maybe it's like,
yes.
Gap logo bad. If you want to go back, it's just like, then it's just like, how did they get it? And maybe that's the answer, Shelby. It sounds like you're about to, like, I think that's it. It's just like, when it goes horribly bad, and that further strengthens my comment about, like, when it goes well, it's almost unnoticeable, because it shouldn't get, it's just, it exists. It's there. Congratulations. But when it goes bad, I think that's when you get mass market really hopping on these things and really kind of destroying them and saying, who could have blah, 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 blah. It's like, what agency or what brand manager didn't, it's like, yeah.
That's something I think about, like, and I have this conversation all the time in the film world of, okay, right, because I'm really ingrained in film and cinema and what's happening in theaters. And there was two different films that came out recently that neither of which have performed very well in the theaters. And people just say, oh, well, it's a bad movie. This is a horrible movie. It's like, okay, is it a bad movie? Or was there a miscommunication? And that's always the question that I have is, okay, well, a recent film came out and said, oh, well, this is just such a horrible movie. It feels disconnected. Like, oh, well, it probably feels disconnected because there was disconnection within the team internally. There was an actor who was trying to push too much. There was a director who was giving too much. There's so many different things that are happening that maybe doesn't really make it to the audience that's receiving it. They just see, well, this is bad. Somebody needs to get blamed for this because I paid money. I went to the theater. I didn't have a good time and I didn't get the movie I thought that I was going to receive. And then we get that pushback as opposed to, oh, well, this is a beautiful piece of cinema. This is a beautiful product. Okay, great. Well, that's just a part of my life now and I'm going to move on. But if it's bad, we better be able to blame somebody for giving us a poor experience, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think good design and good storytelling is almost table stakes. Like, there's a lot of good design out there. So to your point, Shelby, it's almost like when it doesn't go well, we notice it more immediately because there's so much good design that we see every single day that when there's a blip, you're in the, a bad blip, you're like, whoa, this did not go well. But you got to tell us the movies now. Like,
I don't want to get canceled. I'll tell you after. I don't want to get canceled. I've got a little insider tea I can share with you guys.
Nice.
But that is such a key though to having like a really, really good connection with your audience is to have that trust and be able to build that trust. And since you work so much with branding and being able to like speak the language of branding, how is it that you build trust between the audience and the brand itself?
Yeah, I think that's where most is, maybe not most, but I think sometimes we can go astray when it comes to brand identity and branding, is that we forget who we're creating for. A lot of times it's like, well, the client likes this. And it's just like, we're not designing for the client. And that's one of the first things that we'll, transparently we'll tell the client. Just like, we need to remember that we may not be the audience, right? But we need to do our homework, right? In the first phase of what we do is the discovery phase. I'm sure a lot of creative work starts in some version of that, where we're going deep, right? We're understanding everything, the world in which this brand is going to live in. We need to understand it fully. If it's going to be a consumer product good, and it's going to be on shelf, what does the shelf look like? What are the other brands that are there, right? But then an even bigger part of that is, well, who are we selling to? Who are we talking to? We need to get into those worlds and understand our consumers to fully and adequately understand their lives and understand the problems they might be having, and hopefully find the solve with the product that we're trying to sell them. And hopefully it's solving a problem for them. And again, depending on the size of the project and things like that, like that's where sometimes that the time with that, in that discovery phase can be limited, but it's massively important because like any relationship, if you're listening and understanding and have empathy for the person sitting across from you, whether it's a relationship in your family, a best friend, or a brand to consumer, the more you lean into that and truthfully kind of listen and act on that, the better that relationship's going to be. And then that trust starts to kind of build and take momentum, right?
I really love that. I know we can keep talking for a long time based on just that one, and I hate this. But one more question before we let you go. I think we're gonna have to. One last question. What, in your experience, has been your favorite project to work on, and why?
Oh man.
We didn't prep you for this question at all. So
not prep me for this. I think the answer to that comes, there's no simple answer. There's the easy creative answer of like, oh, what's the biggest named client that I've ever worked for? Like, that's phenomenal. Like, I had an opportunity to work with NASA with their Launch America program, and design a logo for the identity for that, it's like, who doesn't, it's NASA. It's like, I'm sure every creative in the world, there's a top 5 list. I'm pretty sure NASA's probably in the top 5, right? It was only through my personal connections that I was just kind of gifted the opportunity to kind of walk into that role and do that. That's the short, easy answer. But I think the better answer for me is I get personal fulfillment, and I'm sure this is probably a lot of creatives, just any project that gets out the door and gets out into the world relatively smoothly is a win, and it's very exciting. And that to me happens with big name clients like NASA did, or medium size. When we worked on Nightcrawler together, and seeing that go live, and we're still kind of tweaking and working on that to make it even better. Even just small projects, right? People who desperately needed even just something as simple as a logo, and they're getting it out there, right? So I just get personal fulfillment based off of the work getting out there, but even just the process by which we made that, in working with cool people, quality clients who were along for the ride, who listened, who pushed for good work, asked the right questions, gave good feedback. Like, that more and more becomes my happy spot, regardless of the name of the brand or the client that I'm working for. It's just like, is that fun? Would you want to work together again on something? Because that was just enjoyable, and it's never going to be perfect. There's going to be bumps along the way. It's creativity. Like, creativity is always, it's not a linear thing, right? So it's always going to have its weird twists and turns, and you try to, steer it obviously in the right direction. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. But for me, I think when I land on those projects where I have a client who's just as enthusiastic as I always am when I come to a project, and we create something together, and it gets out there in some way, shape, or form, that becomes the most fulfilling thing to me, more so than, oh, I did this or I did that big name type of thing. So that's probably my best answer to that, Matt.
No, I like it.
Good answer.
Yep.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Shelby.
Okay. I was just gonna say we're probably gonna hop into our final thoughts. But before that, I wanted to thank Chris so much for being here. This is a great conversation, and yeah, we should do a part 2 because we get more into that audience involvement. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. And shout out Shelby. I think the backdrop is incredible behind you, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. So vibes, right?
I'm just sitting there like, there's a lot of cool stuff happening back there that I'm just like drawn to, and I'm like, Matt and I kind of have. I mean, you can tell. Look at this. Like, if we're doing the side by side is pretty. It's pretty. Like, yeah, those are designers. Of course, they're going to have the thing. But like, you go one step further, you're more eclectic, more texture happening there. Like, I dig it.
See,
I really dig it.
This is the difference
I've been
between
trying
designer
to
and writer.
up my game.
Yeah. It just seems to go a little bit deeper than us superficial designers.
Words, so many words.
Love it.
Bravo. It works. It works, Shelby.
Well, again, Chris, thank you so much for being on. We're going to hop over and do our final thoughts, but yeah, thank you so much. And this was great.
My pleasure. Love seeing you both. Thank you again for having me on. Humbled. And let's do some more work together, huh?
For sure.
I like it.
Awesome. That was a great conversation with Chris, and really being able to get into that idea of trust, and, being able to trust your team, trust your clients, trusting your audience, and just talking a bit about our final thoughts in this too. This is something we talk about a lot, is that idea of trust. And we'd even had that conversation with the client recently of, trust us. You can tell us what's going on, what's happening, and how that's really a relationship that we value with our clients, is just having that, there's no walls, take the walls down. There's no borders. You can talk about whatever you're feeling. What are your struggles? What are your goals? Be honest with us, because that's going to create a better relationship. And I really do think audiences can feel that if there was, something that was really special developed through that process. I think audiences can feel, there was an attachment by the brand. They really felt themselves through this. Like they saw themselves. They did a lot of inner reflection. They know what their audiences are looking for. And they worked hard to tell a story for us that really resonated not only with us, but with them as well. And I mean, especially like as an audience member, I really appreciate when that thought is given. And when there is that trust between creative agency, between brands, and then given to the audience, and trusting the audience to take that story and accept that story and, really, really roll with it. That audience participation, I think, is key, and something that I really appreciate as a writer, is to have audiences actively involved in that process by keeping them in mind during that writing, during that storytelling, during the design creation, and seeing really what would resonate with them.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting too, because maybe I was leading him a little bit with that question of like, hey, does the end audience actually feel the ending result of whenever there is a high level of communication, collaboration, and trust in a project, right? Because I guess it's really interesting to think of it that way, because it's so important to us. And I guess in my head, I wonder, why is it so important to us if it's not felt in the end, And like, I totally get what he was saying. And because yes, I do think it's the kind of thing where maybe we put a little bit too much stock into it sometimes. Yeah. But at the same time, I sort of go back to a client meeting that we had just yesterday, where we we're working through story ideas and through art direction. And when we started to really get into this, well, I guess first of all, I'll say it was a really simple, somewhat simple ask, right? Like we're dealing with like very specific brand elements, and it could be easy just to kind of take the easy path through this, still just do something good, right? And as you were going through the story concepts of like, it's a 20 to 30 second piece, and you were talking about each concept for probably 2 to 5 minutes, maybe more. And I can see in their eyes, they were like, whoa, like that was a lot. And not in a bad way though, but like a lot as in like, yeah, this is what it takes. Like we need to have a great story. And because that's where it starts. If we don't have a great story, the whole team is just lost throughout an entire project.
Yeah.
So it's like, it starts with that story. Everyone needs to be a servant to that story throughout a process. And no, we don't like a portion of that story might be irrelevant, but it's not important right now. What's important is that we all have an understanding of what it is that we are trying to make, so that every single person in the process can have a chance to be creative at that point. Because if we go through a process and we're like, all right, yes, make this blue, this needs to be a circle, this needs to be a triangle, that's really, I don't know, closed creative thinking, I guess. So, but in order to have these great conversations, there needs to be great trust built up with a client. There needs to be great trust built up with a team. And that's where I say that I do think that even though some of it might just feel like we're, again, putting too much stock into that communication, that authenticity, that empathy, it may feel like we're not making a huge difference, but at the same time, that's what leads to a great final result. So I kind of do agree with you a little bit more. Again, I see Chris's point on there.
100%.
But I kind of have to believe it, right? Like I don't know, in a way, like I have to believe that the stuff that every decision that we make matters, because we don't just like choose something because, oh, we just like this color or we just saw this brand element. It's everything that we do needs to be intentional. So how do we create a process where every single creative decision can be intentional?
Yeah. And I think all three of us are a little bit right. I don't think that it's so black and white of it matters or it doesn't matter. I think there's so much working on a subconscious level as well that we don't notice, that maybe the client's not noticing, that the audience isn't noticing. There's a lot of big budget films out there that were not made with the intention of we're going to pull on some heartstrings. It was we're going to pull on some wallet strings. You know what I mean? We don't really care so much about what's about exactly the emotional core of this story, where there's an emotional core because it has to be, not because we want it to be. We'd rather it just be big explosions. And we watch those, and even if that heart wasn't made in the story, like wasn't in the process, audiences will still connect to it. They'll still see themselves in a part of that, because even if you're not creating something that you think is really, emotionally driving, we're all humans. We're still creating things that are emotionally driving, no matter if we're trying not to. There's always going to be a part of us in everything that we do. And I think audiences will grab onto that. And vice versa. If we're really putting a lot of ourselves into a project, the client's putting a lot of themselves into the project, it still might not, in the end, be exactly what the audience is looking for. Maybe a mass audience. But there is the audience that will find that will latch on to that piece. And that's the audience that really matters. So I think that it's not so black and white. It's not so binary. I think it is that gray space. I think there's a spectrum here of how much are you putting into this, and how is the audience going to accept it? And can we trust ourselves through the process? Can we trust the client through the process? Can the client trust us? And can we trust the audience to take this in the end and see it the way that we hope that they will.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really does all fall back to the story in the end, I feel like. And kind of like you said, we put a piece of ourselves in everything that we do. We're supposed to. Yeah. And we, obviously we would love for everything that is made for us or for a brand to be greeted with open arms and everyone just fall in love with it. It goes viral and just like all this stuff, right? But you can't, I don't know, you can't easily generate that. There is no button that makes that. So it does kind of fall back to trusting the process and trusting that the story needs to be something that moves us at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Because if it's not going to move us at all, and this, Chris does a lot more of the branding stuff. There's still stories, obviously, that need to be told on that branding side of things, as well as, with us working through more of the video content. Because if there's nothing there that we can all like latch onto, if we don't feel strongly about this, it's like, you ever watch Chopped?
Mm-hmm.
No, maybe that's not the one I'm thinking of. Okay. I'm thinking of Cutthroat Kitchen. That's what I'm
thinking.
Okay.
Whatever show we're getting to.
Right. I'm getting hungry, you can tell. This is how it goes. Well, they have like this little sabotage thing where people have to like make things with really terrible ingredients sometimes. Yeah. Like instead of using like peanuts, they're given a peanut butter and jelly and basically told to, try to harvest the peanuts from the sandwich, Yeah. And so like I think about that all the time where it is thinking about the ingredients that go into this stuff. Now, it's not impossible, obviously, to make something great with bad ingredients, but it's a lot more difficult. Mm-hmm. So I think that's all you can really do in a process, though, is you can control the ingredients that sort of go into it. And those ingredients are things like, I guess one I'll say is craft skill, right? Well, that is one of the many ingredients. There has to be communication. There has to be trust. And I don't know. I maybe that's weird, but I think of it that way in a visual sense where it's like, all we can do is control the ingredients. We can't necessarily always control the outcome.
Well, and I like thinking about it that way. And I think that ties into, kind of content alchemy of the ingredients that go into creating magic. And
Nice.
Thanks. A little plug for our own show that we're on currently. But I really do. I think the ingredients that it is such a great thing because sometimes you do get thrown a bad ingredient. Sometimes something isn't working. Sometimes there is a problem. And it is working with, okay, maybe you do only have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as opposed to peanuts, and you really, really needed a peanut. But this is what you have, and you need to work with it. And that means you need to create other ingredients. You need to bring other ingredients in. You need to work to create something really gourmet out of this, out of something that you may not have expected to have thrown at you. And that really comes into, again, having that trust. And also, it's that understanding between one another of, can the creative team, can they be trusted with this peanut butter and jelly to make something special? And can we trust the client to understand exactly what it is that we're doing? And will the audiences even know that there was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the mix in the first place? And that's a fascinating thing because they might not even be able to tell. And maybe they will, and maybe it'll become a gourmet meal and it'll become the next big thing. But it is that figure out what your ingredients are and work with what you have, create something really special out of it, and be creative during the process.
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. All right. Another great episode. Awesome. Again, thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back next week with another brand new episode. But until then, stay magical. Content Alchemy is presented by Made by Things. To learn more about us, check out madebythings.com. And if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, send us a message at alchemy@madebythings.com.